right, welcome to our monthly car forms update. Our car forms training. This was originally scheduled for Good Friday, so I rescheduled it for today. Um, right now there's nobody on live, so I'm just going to cover a couple of forms here, and if somebody joins us, I can answer any questions that they may have about anything. Otherwise, we'll have a couple more forms covered because I know last time, which is like a month ago, we were talking about these forms, I believe. So I was going to bring up the seller in possession form, and which is the SIP and the SIPA. So the SIPA is new as of about a year ago, and I just thought this might help when we've got sellers that want to stay in the property. So let me get both of those opened. I'm working from one screen today, which means that my Zoom window is always in the way. All right. Just waiting for that to open in Forms Editor. And just so you know, while we're waiting for this, Zip Forms now has Transact, which we talked about earlier this week. And they now have a way to bring in your contacts from regular Zip Forms over to Transact, as well as you can bring over your templates as well. I've noticed that we've got Amanda joining us. Amanda, do you have any questions on specific forms?
I don't, but I'm sure I'll have questions later.
All right. If you think, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me or throw them in the chat box.
Thank you.
All right. Until then, I was just going to touch on the seller's license to remain in possession addendum, which is for 29 days or less. And then also the seller's license to remain in possession advisory, because more importantly than the SIP form, which we're kind of all familiar with, but there's the SIPA form, which we're not as familiar with because it's new as of about a year ago. Not quite. But I think this is super important because it outlines the risk associated with this. So oftentimes, right, we have a seller that wants to remain in possession, and our buyer might be open to that, or they might be feeling a little reluctant. Either way, and what's happened in the past is this form doesn't really outline things that you should be worried about as a buyer or a seller. And so now we have the SIPA form, which goes in partner with this form to help your clients make those decisions. So the seller in possession advisory, the SIPA form, talks about seller remaining in possession after the close of escrow, right? They may ask for the buyer to stay. The sellers may ask the buyers to remain in the property after the close of escrow, right? They might need time to finish packing or waiting for replacement property to close, whatever that might be. They want to stay in. And there is some risk associated with that. This is not risk free. I have had issues. I have never had an issue with a seller moving out on time. Okay, doesn't mean it won't happen, doesn't mean it can't happen. I'm sure it does happen. I just haven't had that happen. Usually our sellers are pretty motivated to move on. I have had damages done to the property while the seller was still in possession. So there's that takes place. The other thing is too that the buyer's closing on the property, saying they're going to take possession of it. So they have a homeowner's insurance policy in place for that purchase, and they're actually not the home. They are homeowners, but they are landlords at the time the seller's in there. So they want to check with their. They should check with that um, insurance company to make sure that if something happened, right, the house burned down, it was burglarized, something like that, it would be covered. So just something to think about there. And let's see, I was trying to think what else. But anyways, here's right, creating tenancy under California laws. Hey, Tabitha, I don't see you on there. I see you in the chat, but that's weird. All right. Anyways, I see maintenance and habitability, right? Who's going to take care of any maintenance that needs to be done? Seller remains longer than agreed. consideration and legal restrictions, negotiating the terms of the seller in possession, right? Um, just saying they're going to remain for X number of days doesn't adequately address the many rights and obligations of the parties, right? For continued occupancy, timing issues, length of continued occupancies. If it's 29 days or less, we use the SIP form. And if it is 30 days or more, we use the residential lease after sale, the RLAS. Okay, so just a heads up on that. Um, let's see here. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I was trying to get my chat's not participating today, but I do see that you want the notice to perform, so we'll cover that as well. Seller's early departure. Keep in mind that based on the SIP form, if the seller leaves early, the default is that the buyer retains the any monies that was negotiated for the entire time that was negotiated, whether the seller stays or not. So just a heads up on that. Lender issues, right? Security for damage. There is a possession fee, which can get held as part of the SIP, which does help cover any damages. Final verification of property condition, right? The buyer is supposed to conduct a final verification of property condition. The final verification is not a contingency. It's just to confirm that the seller has complied with the specific contractual obligations, right? That it's maintained, that the repairs were done, that they removed all of their items. So I still, final verification is important, even if the seller will be remaining in possession, because the condition of the property at close of escrow will help determine if the seller is entitled to a return to security deposit or possession fee after the seller vacates, right? So whether the seller is remaining or not, buyer should exercise his right to conduct a walkthrough. I've had this conversation with so many agents. Absolutely, you should still do your final walkthrough prior to the close of escrow. I usually note on there that the seller's remaining in possession, and another final walkthrough will be conducted once seller vacates. So I like that just because it notes that they're remaining. Insurance, right? Make sure the seller has some insurance because their item isn't going to be covered. They need a renter's policy, and buyer needs to check with their insurance carrier to make sure that they're going to be covered with somebody else living in the house, legal and tax consequences, and then termination of agency. So make sure you take some time to read through this form, that you know this form, that you understand it. If you have questions, reach out to me, but this form should go in tandem with that SIP form. So if we've got a buyer thinking about letting a seller remain in possession, they should get this form. And if we have a seller that's thinking about wanting to have retain possession after the close of escrow for a period of time, they should also get this form. And it doesn't matter whether they're going to remain for 29 days or 3 days or 60 days. This form should be passed along for review. The only thing that'll change in those situations is what form accompanies this form. So again, up to 29 days, so 29 days and less goes with a SIP form, the seller in possession, and 30 days or more is a residential lease after sale. Any questions about that form? All right. Let's pull up that notice to perform, because Amanda said that that would be a good idea. So we're going to pull that up. Give me just a second. I think we have to go add. NBP. We're going to add a new one in there. And then we have an NSP. Maybe. There we go. We're going to add a new one in there. And then we also have our demand to close escrow. So I think it's a DCE. Oh, let's see if that'll add it in. All right, close. All right, hold on. DCE. Demand. It said it was in there. We're going to hit the little plus sign just so you know if we want to grab it from the transaction. So I was searching the forms library if it's already in the transaction. It's in that bottom section here that I'm looking at. And to add that in, we can either click or drag it up there, or we can just hit the little plus sign and it'll add it in to our queue for editing. All right, so let's take a peek at this. We're going to start with the notice to the buyer to perform. Now, keep in mind our default for a notice to perform in the residential purchase agreement, unless you change it, is 2 days. Okay, 2 days. That means if I serve a notice to perform today, right? It's Wednesday. They have all day Thursday to perform and all day Friday to perform until the end of the day on Friday. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. So the day that you serve it is day 0, and then they get 2 full days to perform. If that notice to perform falls, like if we serve it tomorrow, which is Thursday, they have all day Friday to perform and all day Saturday perform, but Saturday is a weekend or a holiday. So their performance day actually rolls to Monday. So they would have all day Friday to perform and all day Monday to perform before you could cancel that contract. And just because we serve a notice to perform, whether it's to the buyer or to the seller, that does not mean that we have to cancel the contract if this time period passes and they still haven't performed. It gives us the ability to cancel, but it doesn't require cancellation. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. We always want to number these. They should be sequential. So the notice to buyer perform, the first one would be 1, the next one would be 2, right? Some agents use these as just part of their practice, a way to protect their sellers or a way to protect their buyers. So, here, if you ever wonder why, if you've got a situation where you've got a contract and the seller's got a better offer in the background and they're just itching to get the buyer out of contract so that they can move forward with a different contract. Number one, seller can't just cancel on you. They have to cancel based on a stipulation in the residential purchase agreement. If you ever wondered what those were, they're all listed on the notice to perform. Okay. Here and the other thing to note too is that if my notice to perform is not due until, or the contractual action, let's say the removal of contingencies, isn't due until Monday, I can't serve this notice to perform today. It actually can't be served more than 2 days in advance of that contractual action. I could serve it technically tomorrow because the days to perform would be the 2, which would put it on the expiring on the date of performance contractually. So because you end up with those buy days in there being the weekend. All right. You're going to fill out the top of this. Okay, make sure you put the full address on there. Make sure it's the date that's printed in the upper left-hand corner of the contract. Seller hereby gives buyer notice as applicable to remove the specified contingencies and take contractual action as followed. If for any contingency or contractual action selected, this notice to perform is delivered before the time permitted in the agreement, the notice shall be void for only those specified contingencies or contractual actions. I'm rethinking what I told you that if you served it tomorrow, I mean, technically it would be based on days to performance. You may need to wait and serve it on Saturday if you wanted a Monday day.
I have a question. So you're saying that the weekends and holidays don't count?
They count as days. So if I served it on Saturday, they would have all day Sunday and all day Monday to perform. But anytime a performance day falls on a weekend or a holiday, then it rolls to the next business day. So if I served it on Friday, they have all day Saturday and all day Sunday to perform. But because the day of performance, the final day is on a Sunday, that would roll to Monday. So they'd have, if I served it Friday, they'd have all day, basically Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to perform because the performance day would roll to the next business day. Does that make sense?
So then, yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around those day. Is it end of day?
It's end of day.
Okay, so a seller, if you're issuing this, a seller could cancel, right? It gives them the right to cancel after the 2 full days after.
Yep. Yep. And that the last day just has to fall on a business day. All the days count, but the performance day has to be a business day.
Goodness.
I know.
It sounds like more days than you can, but then you're saying you can change it, right?
Yeah, you can change it. You can always change it.
Okay.
You can change it in the purchase agreement. You can change it. And you can always give people more than 2 days to perform too. So just a heads up on that. Like sometimes um if I've got a buyer asking for an extension of something, oftentimes I won't grant them that extension, but I may serve them a notice to perform for 4 days instead of 2 days, right? So we can extend the performance day. All right. This next section just outlines, it's got two sections. One is contingencies, and these all have to be contingencies that were part of the purchase agreement. Okay, if they waive the buyer investigation, obviously we're not going to serve them notice to perform for buyer investigation. Or if they didn't negotiate close of escrow on the buyer's property, then that wouldn't be something we would serve a notice to perform on. These are just things that were negotiated as part of the residential purchase agreement. We've got loan, appraisal, investigation, insurance, review of seller documents, title, preliminary report, the HOA documents and disclosures, a review of leased and liened items, entering into contract for sale of buyer's property, and closing escrow. Those are the contingencies. Now, unless you've handwritten something funky in there, okay, you could write a different contingency, but if you didn't, that would be the ones. And they have to be selected. Then we have all of our contractual actions, right? Like the initial deposit isn't a contingency, but it's an action. The buyer is supposed to deliver the deposit. The default is 3 business days after acceptance. So if they're not doing that, or we're on day one and we want to make sure they're doing that, we would serve that notice to perform, right? Delivery of increased deposit, delivery of signed liquidated damage for the increased deposit. Updated lender information. They're required if they change lenders and we ask them for that information to provide it to us. Notice of FHA or VA requirements. There's a time period for that. Verification of funds. Verification of loan application. Assume or accept leases or liens. Return of statutory disclosures, return of lead disclosures, return of signed fire hardening and defensible space advisory disclosure and addendum, comply with title efforts with title's effort to comply with GTO, assignee's delivery of pre-approval or pre-qualification, delivery of evidence of authority to act, escrow evidence of the buyer's property, evidence of listing the buyer's property, evidence of removing contingencies in the buyer's property, or there's a DD, fill in the blank. Okay. So, and it doesn't have to be one of these. It could be multiple things that we're checking boxes for. So that's totally up to you. If you don't remove the contingencies with either CAR form CR or the RR, so that's the contingency removal form, or the repair request, because remember the repair request automatically removes contingencies if the other party agrees to it, and take the specified contractual actions indicated above within 2 days. So the default, again, 2 days, that's what the default is in the purchase agreement, but you could extend this further on. Days after delivery of this notice to buyer form, seller may cancel the agreement. Seller signs. Notice the buyer doesn't have to sign it. Now, my transactions, if I get served a notice to perform, I'm probably going to have my buyer initial it that they saw it. Okay, because I want to make sure the buyers, oftentimes these can get used as leverage to get our buyers moving forward on things that they might be hemming and hawing on. Not that buyers ever do that, but this form, if we present it to our buyers and say, hey, I need you to initial the notice to perform, we really need to remove that investigation contingency. We have 2 more days to do so, right? Or whatever that was that they sent over to us. Having the buyer initial it just makes it a little bit more real and tangible. Now, I will say too that sometimes my buyers might sign a contingency removal form, but I don't actually electronically deliver that to the seller until I get a notice to perform, so that I drag it out there as long as possible. Then it makes it real easy. They serve a notice to perform. I just send over that contingency removal that the buyer already planned to remove. Okay, any questions about that buyer notice to buyer to perform? This would be
So
from
you
the seller.
can extend it, but you can't shorten it. Is that what I'm understanding?
If you shorten it as part of the RPA, and everybody agrees to that. So if we shortened it before the offer was accepted, then yes, it can be shortened based on what's on the RPA, but the RPA default is no less than 2 days. So that's why this has that here. Does that make
All
sense?
right. Yeah, and then I guess it's better to always issue on a weekday, not a holiday, than a weekend, it sounds like, in a sense.
Well, you're safe, Saturday through Wednesday. It becomes dicey on a Thursday or a Friday because now we're rolling to
Mhm.
Monday.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you.
And if Monday's a holiday, now we're rolling to Tuesday. And just so you know, too, the car kind of defines holiday as like, is the title company open or not? Right? If title companies are closed, it's a recognized holiday. That's banks and title companies. Because oftentimes, like if we're trying to, make a deposit or do something, or we're waiting for something from the lender, those don't happen on the weekend. That's really why it rolls to the next business day. All right. Moving on, we have notice to seller to perform. Same idea as the notice to buyer to perform, but this one just has the items that pertain to the seller. So this would be the buyer giving the seller a notice to perform. So if your buyer wants out of the contract, they've removed their investigation contingency, let's say, and they're trying to figure out how to get out of this contract. They no longer want to purchase. Check out this form because this would be all the things that the seller is supposed to do contractually, or you can issue that notice to seller to perform, and then that would give your buyer a way to cancel. And again, buyer hereby gives seller notice that buyer has not yet received from seller the items checked below. If seller does not provide buyer with these items, buyer may be entitled to cancel the agreement or delay removing applicable contingency. Because remember, like if seller hasn't provided fully executed seller disclosures that they're contractually obligated to, once the seller delivers those to the buyer has another 5 days, I want to say, to review those disclosures and extend that contingency. Okay. And that goes for if seller delivers those documents today and my contingency removal is due Friday, I now have 5 days to review those documents. So now I'm not due to remove it until Monday, anyways. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're representing sellers or buyers, that does fall in line with the contract. So it talks about that in the residential purchase agreement, that you have until the contingency time frame or 5 days, whichever is later, based on delivery of documents. So delivery of information related to leased or liened items or systems. The following fully completed statutory and supplemental disclosures. I like how it lists some of those out here. We have the TDS, the NHD, that's the natural hazard zone disclosure, the seller property questionnaire, the exempt seller disclosure. And then it does reference the paragraphs that you would find those documents in the residential purchase agreement. Fully completed lead disclosure, fire hardening and defensible space advisory disclosure and addendum. Remember, that's only required if the house requires it. Following books or guidelines. Okay, did they deliver these books and guidelines to you? This is why it's a good idea not just to include a hyperlink, although it does talk about those electronic delivery and links now as part of the purchase agreement. But it's always a good idea. I like to separate out these items and attach them to like my home light listing management file separately so that there's no question of whether they received those booklets or not. We have our condo and plan development disclosure, delivery of car form solar. That is requirement. If you're not getting those for solar properties, make sure you're getting those. Delivery of car form WBSA. Disclosure of known material fact, including property insurance claims, preliminary title report, disclosure and evidence of authority to act in a representative capacity, delivery of the following inspection or report. That would be something that you negotiated as part of the RPA. Other disclosures and deliveries, removal of abandoned personal property. Amanda, was it you that had the question on this the other day, or was it somebody else? But now, look, there's it's a line item on this form. Now remember that per the residential purchase agreement, the abandoned personal property, right? Property closes escrow. Buyer gets keys. They go to the house. They're all excited. Yay. And then they find that there's couches and fridges and things left behind by the seller that they just didn't have room for or whatnot, right? That's abandoned personal property. The seller has 3 days. So you're supposed to notify the seller, and then they have 3 days to come and remove those items before the buyer can remove those items and then charge the seller for that. Ultimately, that usually results in like a small claims type action. And then you got other lines there. But so this is on the seller notice to perform. That way we have a record that they were notified of their abandoned property and you can start that process. Contingencies, so those are all the acts as part of the contract. And then contingencies, these would be if the seller negotiated these, the finding of replacement property, the close of replacement property, and removal of substitution of eligibility for VA. Again, that's if you're going to assume the loan, they might require substitution, or there's an other line here as well. If you do not take the action specified above within 2 days, okay, after the delivery, buyer may cancel the agreement notwithstanding the previous sentence. If the contractual action of removal of abandoned personal property, seller shall be given at least 3 days to perform. So there you go. It pulls it on over. So that's your notice to seller to perform. And again, this gives your buyer the right to cancel. Doesn't mean they have to cancel. It's just a way to kind of speed up the process for a seller that's dragging their feet, or a way for the buyer to get out of something if they're trying to. Any questions about the notice to seller to perform?
I have a question. So you're saying if they leave stuff in the property after they close, you could still use this form even though you're not contractually representing them anymore?
Yeah, because contractually, they were supposed to have removed their belongings as
Mm,
part of the contract. So the seller failed to perform part of the contract. So, yes,
okay,
you
because
would.
it was previously agreed upon and then it
Yep.
hadn't been followed through with. I see. Now, what would be the difference on the buy side to send over cancellation or send a notice to perform?
So on the as far as like the buyer sending
Like
this
if
to the seller.
they're, I'm assuming it would only work if they've removed their contingencies or their sellers aren't meeting the like seller's documents contingencies and things like that, right? Or the SPRP.
Yeah. Yep. So if the seller's not performing, even if the buyer hasn't removed contingencies, this is just, hey, seller, you're put on notice. Like if you want to lose this buyer, right, then you need to get those documents over. So sometimes, sellers need a little extra push to finally like finish filling stuff out and get it over to you, or they're dragging feet on things. This would be a way to help speed them up. Even if the buyer doesn't intend to cancel, this is just, hey, like, let's get on your game, seller. Come on, get on the ball and get me the documents. Or it would give the buyer the right to cancel if they were trying to get out. But yeah, that would be the theory behind it, is if you've got a seller that's really dragging foot on like getting stuff to your buyer, this would help speed that up, hopefully.
I kind
Hopefully.
of like it for that. I hadn't really seen it on the buy side because there are so many ways a buyer can cancel, but I have had sellers be really draggy feet or maybe just not a great representation on their end where it's like, you're supposed to do all this stuff. Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And this is something too that, maybe we need to present to our sellers at the beginning of the transaction of, hey, just a heads up. Here are the things, right? Maybe on our time frame, these things should be listed. So we enter into contract. If I've got a listing, I've got all these things lined out of here's when we need to provide those and whether it's been done or not. So that the seller knows what they're supposed to be doing as part of the transaction, not just dropping the ball, or I've dropped the ball by not communicating well to them. So this is, the things on here I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, you could review this, you could send this form to them to review, but I think I'd put it more in like a checklist with my congratulations, we're in escrow. Here are the time frames. Here's when you need to have all these things delivered by, so that you've communicated clearly. And you could do the same thing on the buy side as well, using the notice to perform as a way to figure out what time frames the buyer should be aware of. Yep. Um, let's see here. All right, so that's your notice to perform. Now, the only thing different here is that, we have the seller notice to perform, we have a buyer notice to perform, and then we have our demand to close escrow. So that sellers perform or notice to buyer to perform, that works for everything contractually, except someone who's not closing escrow when they're supposed to. That we use the demand to close escrow. Okay. Seller hereby demands that buyer close escrow on the property is number one. Number two is buyer hereby demands that seller close escrow on the property. And where a notice to perform on the residential purchase agreement defaults to 2 days, our demand to close escrow based on the residential purchase agreement is 3 days. So, whoever's making the demand is demanding that, hey, within 3 days, but no less than 3 days is specified in the agreement after the delivery of demand to close escrow, but no earlier than agreed to the close than the agreed close of escrow date, right? Or by blank date, which is at least 3 days after delivery of this demand to close escrow, but no earlier than the agreed upon close of escrow date, right? So we have two options here. First one is, hey, within 3 days. Close escrow was supposed to be today. I'm serving it because you're not closing escrow, buyer, so I'm serving a demand to close escrow. I'm starting that time frame on the time that I can cancel on you, right? Ultimately, the seller at this point is probably just hoping that the buyer will get on the ball and get this thing closed, because we've been working for 17, 27 days, somewhere in there, to try to get this sucker closed, and now we're still not closing. So that would be the demand to close escrow. The other option is that we could do a specified date, but it needs to be at least 3 days. So like maybe today I had a conversation with the buyer's agent, and they're like, yeah, they're trying to get everything together. We should be able to close on Monday, right? And maybe close the escrow was supposed to be today. I might go ahead and serve a demand to close escrow instead of an extension of contract, signing that with Monday's date on it of, here you go, buyer, you've been put on notice. You have until Monday to get this sucker closed. Otherwise, we can move on with somebody else. Now, again, just like the notice to perform, demand to close escrow doesn't mean you have to cancel. It just gives the other party the option or the serving party the option to cancel. If I have a seller with a listing, I've got a buyer who's not getting this closed, I feel like it's totally ethical. We serve it today, Monday's date, Monday, buyer still hasn't performed. End of the day, Monday, or beginning of the day, Tuesday at 12 a.m. on Tuesday, you better believe I'm going to put that property back on as active on the MLS pending cancellation of current escrow. So I may not actually send the cancellation over, but I'm going to put that property back on the market. My hope is the buyer's going to at some point this next week get their act together and get this sucker closed, or I'm going to get a better offer in hand and we'll just cancel on the buyer and start all over with a new buyer. But for the most part, sellers would rather get it closed than drag it out another 30 days or 20 days that it would take a new buyer to get it closed. So this gives us the ability to say, hey, once this has been served, once the date has passed, we can put that property back on the market as active. And then in private comments, I just put pending cancellation of current escrow, because at any moment I can turn around and just cancel it on the buyer. Okay, so I'm not falsely advertising anything. If you do not close escrow buyer by the end of the time specified and seller has fully performed, seller may do any or some combination of the following. They may cancel the agreement. They may bring legal action against you for damages, including but not limited to the deposit. And they may bring legal action against you to force you to buy the property. Okay, it's rare that a buyer gets forced to buy the property, but when we come down here to our buyer demands that the seller close escrow, it's going to be more likely that the sellers or the buyer's going to force the seller to sell. Seller can't just decide they don't want to sell a property. This buyer section is very similar to the seller section. It's just the names have been changed. That's all that's different. Any questions on our demand to close escrow?
I have a question. We can't, obviously they need to be contractually bound, but we couldn't issue it and give them no time, like a day to perform. We can't shorten
No,
it like the last one,
no.
right? It's like
Yeah.
that contract default or extend it. I see. Okay.
Yeah, you can extend it. You can't shorten it unless as part of the residential purchase agreement, just like the notice to perform, if it was written in as shorter, our demand to close escrow is going to be 1 day instead of 3, then you could shorten this, but otherwise it needs to be at least 3. That's the default in the residential purchase agreement.
I see.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other
That clears
questions?
up a lot.
Oh, good.
It's almost
Good.
it's almost like you should either have that timeline and ready to send so it expires on the day that you are either going to close or needing to remove that contingency, or you issue it on the day that it should have been closed or should have been removed, and then they have a couple days after.
Yeah, and like I said, some agents make these forms part of their normal practice, which,
Right.
especially from a seller's point of view, it makes sense to me. Like, I don't get easily offended. So if somebody's like, hey, it's 2 days before contingencies are due, I'm sending a notice to perform, I'm not going to get bent out of shape about it because I'm like, wow, that agent's actually doing right by their seller and setting them up for success versus those that wait until, 2 days after the contingency was supposed to be removed and then serve this. So I respect that. But there are agents who get bent out of shape about it. So just a heads up on it. If you decide to use these as part of your normal practice, which I personally recommend, um, then just make sure that you present it to the other side in a way that helps it to be received as part of a normal practice, not I've got a vendetta against you. I
That's
mean,
so
unless
funny
you,
because that's how people think of it. Yeah.
yeah,
But
I
it's
mean,
it's so
it's,
contractually binding, like you agreed to it. So then we're gonna ask you to do what you said you're gonna do.
yeah,
That's
makes
it.
sense to
That's all
me.
it is.
Because
Yeah.
again, if I'm representing a buyer, my inspection contingencies due, I've already prepped my buyer. My buyer is ready to remove that investigation contingency, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to sit on that until the seller pushes me for it because I'm here to
Right.
protect my
Depends on
client.
which side of the fence I'm on.
Right? It does. That's
Yeah, just
this is why you can't represent both sides. I will stand by the fact that you can't represent both sides. Well, it gets even more confusing in Idaho. You should hear about the Idaho agency laws. But in California, right, you can do dual agency, but now we have a fiduciary responsibility to both. And now it's really confusing of if my goal for the buyer is to drag this contingency out as long as possible, but my goal with the seller is to get the contingency removed on time. Like, whose interest am I really protecting? Right? Like, so hard.
and get it in writing and just get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, that's my theory. But yeah, I will drag this out until I get one of these from a seller if I'm representing a buyer. Like I
Same.
will push you to it or I'll wait
But I'll
until close.
also issue them on the other side if I'm not getting any answers.
Yeah. Right? If you're not
People are
getting
like, why
answers, I'll
would you
use
do that? And it's
representing.
like, well, you said you're going to do it. And you didn't do it. So we're telling you to do it or we can cancel on you. And that's the answer.
Yeah, contractually, like obviously your seller needs a little help getting me the documents that they're supposed to contractually give to me. So I'm just giving you some ammo to help the seller get motivated to get me what they were supposed to get me in the first place, right? Like,
Yeah, they wrote the
let me help you.
contract. We just agreed to the offer.
Yeah, let me help you. So, anyways, that's my theory on these. I don't get bent out of shape, but again, you may want to like cushion it a little bit when you present it, if it is just part of your normal practice to just prepare them in advance. And it may, you may prepare them in advance going into it. Like, hey, we accepted the offer. Amanda, I'm just going to give you a heads up. Like, part of my normal practice is 2 days before any of your contractual actions, when they're due, you're going to get a notice to perform from me because my job is to protect the seller. So I don't want you to get offended when I do that. It's not a personal attack against you, just preparing you so that you can prepare your buyer that when we agreed that contingencies are going to be 17 days, we expect them to be removed in 17 days, right? Like set them up for success from the very beginning if that's how you're going to do your business. And again, I would recommend doing business that way.
100%. I appreciate it. I think a lot of people do get bent out of shape and it's like not necessary.
Not necessarily. People get bent. Well, anyway, side note. We were
Well,
watching that movie.
what
People
I
get bent out
think
for stuff.
that I like about it is that it gives you the ability to, not that it is.
Yeah, it's not the cancellation, right? It's just the motivator.
You would need to follow it up with a cancellation still.
You would need to follow it up if you were going to actually cancel
Right.
on them. You follow up with that cancellation form. Yeah, it's just a motivator.
I like
Just
it.
get stuff done like you agreed to. Fabulous. Any other questions or anything? Alrighty, then I will wrap up for today. I think that was a good conversation on notice to perform and demand to close escrow. We also talked about the SIP and the SIPA. So we will be back next month, the first week of May. Let's see here. I'm just going to confirm with that. Yeah, because Memorial Day is not till the end of May. So we're back on May 1st, the first week Friday of the month. May 1st is when we'll be back. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to throw them to me so that I know what you want me to cover. Otherwise, I will see you on the 1st. Or if you have any questions, if you're watching this on replay, you can throw them in the comment section. All right, see y'all soon. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.